We're not in the habit to track revenue leakage from these behaviors. Welcome to Not Playing Along. This is a podcast about cultural and corporate dysfunction. The stories in this podcast can cost people their careers, so the guests are always anonymous and characters' names have been changed. But the behaviors we hate or make fun of at work or in Western culture are just people doing exactly what the system rewards. We expect people to act well, but we rarely design the conditions that make those behaviors safe or even worthwhile. This podcast is about seeing those forces, and it's about redesigning them, because we are refusing to pretend all this is normal, and we are not playing along. Hello, and welcome back. In the first episode, I introduced myself and why I started not playing along. In this episode, I want to talk about the core idea behind this show, which is this. Why is it that so many modern workplaces make people miserable? And how do these dynamics actually block companies from making a lot more money? Do me a favor. Think back over your entire corporate career. I bet you can recall a meeting where someone was publicly embarrassed, but the person who did it used the right words and the right tone, and somehow that made it okay. I bet you can recall a leader or a coworker saying or doing something that really messed up someone's perception at work. Maybe even took away opportunities, or worse, ruined their career. I bet you remember sitting in at least one meeting thinking, is what we're talking about really that important? And in the grand scheme of things, does the topic even deserve the meeting? Nevertheless, the emotion that people are experiencing right now. There's probably been at least one time when someone dropped the ball and you had to pick it up. At least one time that someone refused to participate in the way that you needed them to. And you realized the system had no way of dealing with it. You could either look like you can't handle it or end up doing it all yourself. We have created a strange kind of order at work. Everyone is polite. Everyone follows the rules. Everyone smiles. And yet, underneath that surface, something is clearly wrong. Because too many people aren't behaving like humans trying to do meaningful work together. Instead, they're behaving like players inside of a game. You see, most people assume dysfunction comes from bad personalities, but actually, most of the time, it comes from how the system is set up. In our corporate system, we have accounted for salaries, bonuses, titles, hierarchies, but we have forgotten about what drives how people interact day to day. I'll say it again. In corporate, we have accounted for things like salaries, bonuses, titles, hierarchies, but we have forgotten about what drives how people interact day to day, what decisions they'll make, what they'll do and say, and what they won't do and won't say, not just at work, but also in our culture. We forgot about the invisible pendulums that swing us toward our own psychological needs. Subconsciously, every one of us is prioritizing those above all else. When we make decisions, when we say or do something, those things are driven by invisible emotional pendulums. They're powered by invisible psychological incentives. That's the system that we never thought to design. Our corporate system is almost a little blind, a little oblivious to all of this. It actually rewards the wrong behaviors because it measures the wrong things. Most companies measure things like individual output, visibility to leadership, short-term metrics like budgets and quarterly results. So, not surprisingly, people optimize for what is measured next at the expense of what would actually help the company. Over time, individual players' psychological needs overpower the need to benefit the system. For example, in corporate, recognition is often treated as survival. And so competing for that attention makes us prioritize the wrong things, gatekeep, stall, play power games, individually and through internal politics and alliances, all of which divert us from actually helping the company and create a miserable experience for everyone along the way. When psychological needs are unmet, people start extracting energy from the system to meet them. This means people begin pursuing those needs through the structure of the company, not consciously, but the workplace becomes a game where players play rounds of status, validation, and control. Work stops being about building the future. It stops being about advancing collective goals. And instead, it becomes about satisfying individual psychological needs. You see, companies measure output, but they fail to measure behavioral incentives that shape attention allocation. That's why our work environment becomes about who's more visible, who's more right, who's more powerful, who can win the attention of the right person, about who gets access and who doesn't. and what that means. That's where everyone's attention goes. And it inevitably results in gatekeeping, stalling, power games and public put-downs, internal politics and alliances, a workplace that people put up with only because they have to, and many, many delayed or completely missed revenue opportunities. Because when no one has built a system to catch and redirect all of this, people are distracted. Companies think they're losing money because people aren't working hard enough. But the real financial loss is attention, where people's attention goes. Massive amounts of human attention being spent navigating invisible politics instead of solving real problems. Instead of benefiting the entire system, they're fulfilling individual psychological needs. Attention is one of the biggest invisible costs to companies. Just think about how much attention is spent on protecting image, managing politics, repairing reputational damage, rewriting emails, overthinking, and acting out of fear, because all those things cause anxiety. They make us afraid. That's a lot of wasted attention. And that's also the paradox. Companies lose money from the behaviors they reward. I want you to consider the magnitude of this revenue insight. Companies often reward behaviors that reduce their revenue because we're not in the habit to track revenue leakage from these behaviors. Let's talk about revenue leakage. Revenue leakage is in diverted attention, managing perception, political positioning, protecting reputation, defending territory. Revenue leakage is also in what we call the fixer tax, where high performers divert their attention to becoming fixers because the system protects people who are the most pleasant and not necessarily the most talented. Revenue leakage is in what we might call the head in the sand syndrome, where people fear reputation damage so much that they avoid admitting mistakes, raising risks, challenging bad ideas, which leads to costly mistakes. Revenue leakage is in diluted decisions, diluted speed. We discourage ownership when we ask for things like more meetings and more meetings and more. Revenue leakage is in suppressed talent, who stop overachieving because they see that the system rewards politics. Revenue leakage is in the turnover of the best people, because the most capable are usually the first to leave. And the people who leave first are usually the ones the company actually needed the most. The system we built unintentionally creates the exact problems that companies are trying to solve. Corporate environments create the illusion of order. Everyone is polite, dressed well, speaking professionally, but underneath that surface, the system is underperforming because people are distracted. It's just that we don't see the invoice right away. And if you've been in that kind of system, you might agree that it may actually be a lot less healthy than many informal environments. We've created a kind of pseudo-order at work, a fake environment where no one is fully themselves, and many are scanning for loopholes and leverage or a way to advance their own agenda. And because the surface looks polished, because it can be rationalized, because it stays just enough inside the lines of what's acceptable, we tell ourselves this is the best we can do in the name of peace and progress. But what's actually happening costs companies millions of dollars. And it costs us our mental health. A dysfunctional workplace isn't one where bad things happen. Every organization has problems, and that's okay. A dysfunctional workplace is one where the system rewards the behavior everyone claims they hate and doesn't even realize it. Workplaces are one of the largest human coordination systems ever created. Millions of people spend most of their waking lives inside them. So the quality of those systems has enormous consequences for mental health, for innovation, for culture, for how people experience life. And yes, for how much money a company will ever make, how soon their stock will plummet. The good news is that most of these behaviors aren't permanent features of human nature. They're responses to incentives, invisible incentives that are there due to a lack of intentional design. And incentives can be redesigned. What if we could create a work environment that meets each person's psychological needs? And more than that, what if it could meet those needs in a way that directs them towards genuine collaboration, towards, yes, uplifting each other, whether someone is above you, beside you, or below you hierarchically, all while making the company a lot more money. I think we would crave an environment like that. I cannot wait to show everyone how all this could be done. I am Adri Delore, and this is Not Playing Along. Send us your story or come on the podcast anonymously. Ask for help with your situation. Sponsor the podcast. You can do all those things on notplayingalong.com. And if this episode landed for you, if it named something you've been feeling, please share it. Send it to someone you know, someone in your Slack, your DMs, your executive circle, the people who need to hear it. Because the only way these patterns change is when enough people see them clearly. Next week, we're exposing another one. Until then, keep questioning what's normal. I'm Adri Delore, and this is Not Playing Along.